Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is always a pleasure to come your way with interesting conversations with very interesting guests, including ones who return for a continuation of a conversation that we started, who knows, weeks, months, maybe even years. We've had people that haven't been on the program for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and here we are in our 15th. Well, today we bring back, I say, a very special guest. We have a great conversation the last time, and I know that we will this time because we're talking about the, shall we call it, at least for this context, the survival of humanity on the planet, and how is that going to manifest if we can't seem to get along? Well, we're going to talk about some very interesting topics with our very special guest returning to our Zoom cameras and microphones, Dr. Andrew Schmookler. He is an award-winning author, and he is also, my screen just jumped on me. How rude of my screen to do that. He's an award-winning author. He is a former Democratic nominee for Congress in Virginia, as well as a columnist. And Dr. Andrew Schmookler, thank you so much for joining us again here on the program to continue our conversation.
I hope you don't mind if I say that my last name is Schmookler.
Beg your pardon, Andrew Schmookler.
Yeah, there I am.
I beg your pardon.
That's okay. You just cut off the first 3 letters of the name, and Schmookler is what you're left with.
That's true. But it isn't Schmookler, it's Schmookler. And I find, and again, I'm one though who wants to make sure. I mean, I was looking right at it. I don't know if that.
It's okay. I just wanted you. I hate to find fault. I just wanted your listeners to know what my name was.
I have no problem with corrections because I'm here to learn too. Well, it is great.
That's one of your great virtues I've discovered. I mean, I've been impressed with the extent to which that is true.
Yeah. Well,
not everybody, over the age of whatever, is really interested in learning.
Well, I in one of my interviews, I shared my perspective on something. Then my guest came back with, well, you might think about it this way. Shared his. I thought about it. Not long and hard, because we were in the heart of an interview. I said, well, there goes another one of my straw huts up in flames. And you know what? I don't mind if we burn them all down and I start over again because...
Well, with the 3 little pigs, the huts that were made of straw.
That's right.
Did not endure when the wolf came. But,
right.
If you got a guest that'll build you a brick house,
well,
there you go.
Exactly. And I love this saying, it is better to begin in doubt and end in certainty than to begin in certainty and end in doubt.
Well, I'm most concerned about the people who never bother with the doubt, who go straight to certainty and stay that way all the way to the grave, without having taken a look around to see what the facts actually indicate.
Exactly. And that's part of what we're going to talk about here. There were a couple of articles that you passed my way, and I find them rather interesting. We're talking, of course, about a lot of the work and study that you've done over the years. One of the articles was The Fate of Human Civilization, which we sort of touched upon in our last program, but also the central challenge facing civilization is creating creating creature. That's what we are. We are creative and we create stuff. We make stuff.
Yeah, we're the only species to have invented our own way of life. And that is a crucial thing for understanding the human story.
Yeah, in spite of the fact that we certainly have seen other species, other animals, specifically, I don't know whether this is the proper term here, or in the ape category, where they start to develop skills for creating tools. I remember seeing this one movie, this documentary, where this monkey took a stick. He loved termites. So he stuck this stick down inside the termite hole and we pulled it out and all these termites were there. He's going, hey, this is great.
The distinction is about inventing our own way of life is not absolute, like everybody else is at zero. Absolutely. But even when up until 10 or 12,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers, for you know, Homo sapiens starts 300,000 years ago, but you know, you can go further back, and there are tools and stuff like that.
Sure.
Even up until when we had language and we had tools and certain amount of symbolisms going on with paintings on the walls, even then, we were still living in the niche in which we evolved biologically. Whereas as soon as people start rearranging the ecosystem, like with the domestication of plants in gardens or the domestication of animals and in herding, at that point, we are leaving the niche in which we evolved biologically and inventing new ways of life that have open-ended possibilities. And that's an unprecedented step. And my work has all been predicated on the implications that have not been looked at of taking an unprecedented step. And we went into some of that, I think, last time. Yeah. But anyway, that sets the stage for, we're in a whole new situation. We unleash forces that are troublesome. And I'll hand it back to you.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I use this phrase, I use this analogy of primarily of a person of faith who is, let's just say, walking around in a beautiful meadow, and they have their hands cupped in front of them. If they could hold their personal will in their hand, I just want to do God's will, I want to do God's will, and they toss it in the air, God catches it, is moved. One of my creation wants to do my will, and is compressing that down into the size of a baseball, and rears back and hurls a 90-mile-an-hour Nolan Ryan fastball, hits the individual right in the forehead, and then says, then do something with your life, the life that you've been given. You are not, you're not a puppet on a string being manipulated by forces you do not understand. But you have kind of sort of poked a hole in that by saying that we unleash forces that we may or may not understand, but that we don't understand I'll use the term, unintended consequences thereof. Okay, initially, this is why we're going to do this. I'm going to throw out, just as an example, nuclear power. Sounds like a great idea. And people who are in favor of it say it's clean energy. And I go, where do you see that it's clean?
Let me jump in, if I may.
So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so. To me, the issue is not that we're thrown some kind. Well, I think Nolan Ryan's fastball was more than 90 miles an hour, but he threw harder than that.
Okay.
But I see everything in an evolutionary perspective.
Okay.
I think that that's absolutely essential. I mean, I think we need to understand really what the story of life is, out of which we emerged. And life created in mammals more intelligence than there had been in, reptiles or dinosaurs. And then they created in the primates a group of species that were more intelligent than the rest of the mammals. Though, we're not the only, there's pigs are intelligent and elephants are intelligent and stuff. And then there's one species that continues this process and has a creative capacity that's unmatched in quality, and it enables it to invent things, create things, and also, because it's become cultural, which is part of what we're talking about here, they develop the capacity to pass along what people have come up with from generation to generation. So you make possible something like cultural evolution.
Okay.
It's an accumulative process.
Right.
And then this creative intelligence takes a step which is not like the hunter-gatherers, who are living in a way which is fundamentally continuous with what primates have been doing, as bands for millions of years. I mean, it's 7 million years ago, we part ways with the chimpanzees and like that. They're living in primate bands. And so even were the hunter-gatherers who first started thinking we can plant seeds and not just depend on what we gather. Right. We can pen some animals, not just depend. So that's all it takes. And according to me, and this is, a whole argument that I just want to point to and not get into, we embark upon a process where we have the ability to keep inventing. We have broken out of having to be only, a few families as a society. We're able to start creating viable entities called civilized societies that are bigger and structured differently and operate differently in terms of how they get a living from anything that natural selection created. This is all out of the creative intelligence. And here we are in a situation where I say we get swept up into a process that drives our civilization in destructive ways. Because we have left the natural order, which evolution creates to have certain properties that maintain it as a good perpetual motion machine. And we plunge into a disorder because there's nothing to control how we interact with each other. So anyway, I'll just skip a few steps and just say we're left with a destructive process. And we are left to this destructive process in a situation where we continually innovate and accumulate things that are either selected to continue into civilization or they're not. And since the disorder we've plunged into has meant a war of all against all, an anarchy, what gets perpetuated is what survives a war against all against all. And that's the destructive force that I'm pointing to. But we keep on accumulating these things. And eventually, as I can go into if you want, it becomes inevitable that we'll have the capacity to destroy ourselves. And it's just more or less in the oldest people alive right now have been alive for the discovery of two ways that we could destroy ourselves that weren't part of the civilization picture for the 10,000 years that went before. So the fate of human civilization has got to do with, will we bring under control those forces before they destroy ourselves?
There's a phrase that is often used when having these kinds of conversations that, those who refuse to look at history, learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I don't know if it was you or another one of my guests when I used that phrase, they said, okay, that's great, but what? What are we supposed to learn from history? And then I got to, I was going to ask you, so are you an optimist or a pessimist? And then and as you're sharing what you're sharing, I begin to realize that optimism or pessimism is somewhat irrelevant in this conversation. It has nothing to do with the whole process of evolution of our species and civilization. That
I think
we're going to make choices
of optimism
or not.
Pessimism. I think it is an important question.
Oh, okay.
Because, in a way,
okay.
I think that the spiritual traditions teach us that that hope is one of our spiritual tasks. Despair is a spiritual failure. So I go around these days saying I think it's a toss-up whether human civilization will survive for the long haul or will have just self-destructed, and we can go into the reasons for that or not. But regardless, toss up 80-20, whatever. Our task is to focus on what will it take to get to the good destination that we want. And in addition to the question of can we maintain hope and act from hope, there's the question, do we have the moral and spiritual passion for seeing to it that human humankind thrives and life on earth thrives versus the destruction that could occur? Do we care enough? Do we find what's at stake sacred enough that we rise to the occasion, like Luke against the Death Star, and like Frodo getting those rings into the fiery whatever that was, or Sully getting rid of the rapacious military-industrial complex on plundering Pandora in its quest for unobtainium? Do we have that caring about whether our grandchildren and their grandchildren live on a healthy planet, and make our species story one of success versus the alternative, which is very real at this moment, that we will have shown that life on Earth made a really bad bet when they brought forth a creature that could create a civilization, but didn't manage to make a go of it.
Dr. Andrew Schmookler is my guest. His website is A Better Human Story, and I believe that is a .org, if I am not correct, if not mistaken.
Yeah, it is a .org. To go back to the Lord of the Rings.
I love that. That's great. And we are talking about a better human story here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I love these kinds of conversations. You have brought up one aspect that we talk about very regularly on this program. You talked about, I'm going to use the term, the spiritual aspects. You talked about, recognizing and acknowledging the sacredness. And there are those who, from a broader perspective in their minds, they recognize that. But there are others who want to make sacred those things that aren't necessarily sacred, like the things that we've accumulated, the things that we've invented. The technology, for example, there's almost a worship-like quality on the part of folks. And in a way, you can kind of see that when you're walking the streets, because you see people on their screens looking, and it's like, okay, are you praying? Are you, it's like the phone or the screen has become their God, and so forth.
So our civilization, our society, American society, is not in very good shape these days, though I did have fears that we would be in worse shape today than we are. But
we'll talk about that.
we can talk about sort of like two different problems. You brought up one of them, which is making the wrong things into God. Whether it be material things or like the crowds in Nuremberg, in ecstasy, listening to Der Fuhrer in the 1930s, a guy about whom one of the biographies is called The Psychopathic God. And we in America have witnessed people who are mistaking the evil for the good, or in the case of materialism, I wouldn't say it's the evil, it's just a false god. In the Bible it says you cannot worship both God and mammon.
Exactly.
So there are people who essentially end up worshiping, like some murderous psychopath.
Oh yeah.
Which is like worshiping the devil, and then there's worshiping mammon. And I write weekly op-ed columns to address people that I live among in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, who I believe have mistaken the evil for the good. But my life's work contains a piece which is addressing another dimension of our spiritual malaise, if you will, which is I'm addressing not the people who call themselves Christian and yet adhere to ally themselves with something which is sort of the opposite.
Right.
My life's work is addressed more to the liberal world, the world of the secular culture, which has left behind the ways in which religion provided people with a route into the spiritual dimension or the sacred or like that. I think that what's happened in the secular worldview is that there isn't, having pushed away the traditional religious ways of getting there, they don't think that there's really anything that conjures forth those passions, like killing for fighting the Death Star, or saving life on Earth, on that planet in Avatar. There's a lack of a space for there being such a thing as the sacred. And what I've tried to do in what I call my integrative vision, which is to show, which I'd be happy to go into. It's not what we plan to talk about. But I can show the reality and the importance and the life-serving nature of a spiritual dimension, which can be understood in evolutionary terms, in a secular way, in a way which is based on reason applied to evidence. To build a bridge by which people of a secular orientation can discover that there is something that is worth calling the spiritual dimension, which can be shown to be important and which we need to be able to plug into because it is a source of life-serving guidance. So that's a place I'm happy to go, or we can go back to, the central challenge facing humankind, or wherever you want to go.
Absolutely. We're talking with Dr. Andrew Schmookler. His website is, of course, a website. I love the title of it because it speaks to what we are trying to create, although we don't put it in these terms, but I like the way he puts it in his website, abetterhumanstory.org, which of course we will be linked to, where you can read more about the work that he's doing. You can read his op-ed pieces and so forth as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Dr. Andrew Schmookler is my guest, and we are talking about a better human story in a very, very broad sense, but talking about moving from as you started out the program to talk about the survival mode that we were in as human beings early on in our existence as the hunter-gatherers and so forth, and just literally just surviving. I mean, every day was a matter of survival because you never knew whether you were the prey or you were the predator, depending upon at that time what creatures were roaming the plains or the mountains or what have you. I do want to bring this in.
I actually think that when civilization emerged in the ancient world, people's lives were more precarious than they were as hunter-gatherers. I couldn't prove that, but I've studied both worlds. And when a war of all against all, when the anarchy breaks out, human life becomes more traumatic than it is. Like if you see the gods must be crazy, or
Oh yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's not where I get all my anthropological knowledge, I assure you. But I don't think, people have always been, is there a saber-toothed tiger or a bear or, a lion out there? But I think I would have felt more insecure in the kind of world that we've seen once we set off on the path of civilization.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with you that because it's like, as we are speaking, the United States has just finished, although they're still doing some bean counting of sorts. We just finished what is referred to as the midterm elections of 2022. And we talked a little bit about this in terms of what we thought prior to the vote that was taken. And then, of course, how it actually has turned out. And it's, even as we speak, it's not 100% clear, but it's not what it's not what a lot of people expected. And that seems to be the case, which actually, to be honest with you, is a good thing in my opinion, that we've had some elections that have not been what we expected. So, the level of uncertainty in our civilization, in our society, continues to grow. And in the reality of things, going back to the example of, the prehistoric man and so forth, there was uncertainty there too. And we've always had uncertainty. It's just to what degree, to what level. And the one thing that I looked at, for example, with this election, was three possible outcomes. Number one was there was going to be what was termed by many supposed pundits was going to be a red tsunami that was going to wipe the blue off the map. The other was the reverse, because people are just so tired and fatigued of all of the BS and so forth. Then my theory was the third. We were going to wind up somewhere in the middle where we would maintain a certain level of equilibrium. In other words, the red would actually turn into more of as the joke was made, a pink swirl rather than a red tsunami. And it seems as though, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. But we are still here the day after. We're still moving forward. I haven't heard about any riots or fights or shootings or chaos. I haven't heard any of that, although I am waiting for the other shoe to drop with the false claims of irregularities across the board.
Can I break in?
Please do.
Yeah. The equilibrium thing is the part of what you say that I don't go along with.
Okay.
What motivates me is that since 2004, I've been passionately involved in this. One of our two major political parties has become something quite extraordinary. I define evil in a careful way. I define evil as a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse, or consistently spreads a pattern of brokenness. And I think that works for the religious framework. It works for the secular framework that I'm trying to develop. And something remarkable happened to the Republican Party. I grew up with Eisenhower as my first Republican president.
Mm-hmm.
And all the way through the first Bush presidency, Republican presidents were within a certain range of normal.
Yeah.
What's happened to that party is unprecedented in American history. And so from my point of view, the optimal outcome would be to take as much power as possible out of the hands of a party that virtually I can't point to anything that they have done in recent years that makes things better. Mm-hmm. This is me. I'm not a partisan type. Mm-hmm. In the 80s, I worked for I was associated with a group called Search for Common Ground. I had a radio show called A Meeting of Minds, talking with conservatives. I'm a bridge builder. Mm-hmm. But something has happened over there, and it's come down to the central battle going into the midterms was one which is really germane to the future of humankind, mm-hmm. and B, equates to a battle between democracy and fascism. Mm. And, fascism is, wherever we've seen it arise, it always is destructive. It creates, you look at Ukraine, the war created by that fascist dictator in Russia. Mm-hmm. Hitler was drawn to war. Putin is drawn to war, always lusting for more power, no matter how much power there's there. It is spiritually sick. And so when we think about the the fate of humankind. And I say, well, it's a toss-up whether we'll destroy ourselves or not. There are two ways that have become visible a little bit. One of them a little bit before my lifetime. I was born in 46. Mm-hmm. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the year before. I was probably conceived around the time that Hiroshima was obliterated by an atomic bomb.
Yeah.
But we can see that we are in danger of destroying ourselves through war because we have developed at this point with our cumulative innovations, we have developed nuclear weapons, and who knows, I don't know what else there might be, people were not foreseeing that 100 years before it happened.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's one way we could go. And we don't want there to be great powers, particularly the United States. We have always been a leading force in creating an international order. And we need to create a different kind of international order. Or we're playing Russian roulette. Eventually, something like the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, where we wondered whether we were going to all be alive when this thing worked its way through. Well, it did. Kennedy and Khrushchev navigated their way through that without a nuclear holocaust. But historians say it could have gone wrong. And we are looking at the nuclear saber rattling in Ukraine, and we're looking at possible confrontation over Taiwan. We can't keep going through those things. So we've got to ask ourselves, how do we order civilization? So those kinds of Russian roulette games of you spin the chamber and pull the trigger and you hope it's not got the bullet in it, that we don't keep on doing that. Yeah. So if the Republicans are checking the box for the characteristics of a fascistic force.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go into that, but it's just right there in front of us. It used to be hidden. I was worried about in 2004. There was a great sermon delivered by a Unitarian minister in Texas back then, showing that there was already a danger of fascism. He knew what he was talking about. Yeah. But now it's really right out there in front. If we have an America that's turned into a fascistic regime, I don't see us moving toward an international order that sort of assures the peace.
Yeah.
And the other way we can destroy ourselves is through destroying the ecosystem, the biosphere that we depend on. We're already on our way into some people say it could be catastrophic, and particularly if we don't take action to stop what we're doing to disrupt the climate process. We're heading into a world where we can already see that between rising sea levels and droughts and floods and uninhabitably hot places and mass migrations destabilizing the international order, we can already see that there are big problems out there. And we need to reorder our civilization, hoping it's not too late, that we don't destroy the foundations of our lives.
Yeah.
And we know that the force that did not have a red wave yesterday has been full-time doing everything they can to block our taking constructive action on the problem of climate change. Yeah. So we know they're not going to lead the way for the world to become better ordered so that humankind lives in harmony with the planet and isn't like a bull in the ecological china shop. Yeah. So that's what was at stake yesterday. And I was dreading an outcome where we would take a big step in the direction of the kind of killing American democracy, where people refuse to respect the will of the people, where we've come to the point where instead of the people controlling the power of the government, we've got a government that is not accountable to the people, that controls and manipulates and exploits the people. So that's what was at stake to me, at least potentially. And I'm delighted that it didn't turn out as bad as I thought it might.
Yeah. Well, and what's so interesting is, talking about not learning from history, what was the main reason why this country was founded? Because the people were living under what they refer to as the tyranny of a king overseas. And they didn't want that. They didn't want to be ruled by a king. Well, how is that different from what you've just described? That we, seemingly were heading in that direction. I still remember the quote from this one gentleman running for governor of one of the northern states, who said, "If I'm elected governor, I will see to it that Republicans never lose another election." And I'm thinking, wait, what?
That happens only in countries like the Soviet Union.
Yeah. What do you mean?
The Communist Party never lost an election from 1917 to 1990 or whatever it was.
And again, you have people like Saddam Hussein, who he held an election even before the election had been, even before the votes had been cast and tallied. He declared that he won by 95%. I was like, what? So this is basically where we have been for the last, let's just go back, say, to 2004 in terms of the progression, the evolution of this situation. And again, I don't want to, I know neither of us wants to get partisan in any way, shape, or form. That's not the intent. What we're trying.
But some important realities have to do with what has become of one of our parties.
Exactly. We're talking with Dr. Andrew Schmookler. We're talking about a better human story.org. A better human story is what we're talking about here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I want to ask you, because it's come up a number of times, it's one of the main focuses of this program. And granted, yes, we've been talking a great deal about the material world in terms of human civilization. But we've touched upon this a few times throughout in terms of the spiritual aspects. And one phrase that came to my mind that I wanted to ask you about, and that is, and maybe it's self-evident, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. What is your observation of what the soul of America was, and what's the state of the soul of America today? Bleak? Is there hope in general? Let's just maybe broaden it out. We could go to the factions. I don't want to do that. I want to kind of keep it more collective. Do you think that there is a general sense of hope within the populace of America today?
Well, there's a lot of fear.
Sure.
And let me say this. The soul of America is actually a phrase. I think back in the 2005, I was writing that phrase. I don't think I had heard it from other people, but that was what was at stake, that I could see in the forces that were rising. And we, again, there's a two-part problem with the soul of America. There are the people who mistake the evil for the good.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are people who don't understand that the battle between two forces that could be called good and evil, or you can call them other things, but they act a lot like good and evil. There's the people who don't recognize how crucial that battle is as a central part of the human drama. And that's one of the things I've gone to great lengths to show, that there are these two coherent forces operating. And that part of the soul of America that looks at a malignant narcissist and responds I've tried really hard to understand exactly how this works. I've talked with these people on the radio back in the 90s when I had my own radio show, a show where I'd say, let's talk with each other in a spirit of mutual respect and genuine inquiry, as if we might actually learn from each other. And I came to love the kinds of conservative goodness I saw in them. the people who really lived their Christian values and were patriotic, revered the Constitution, and saw the centrality of good character to making a good human world. I really learned from them, and they learned something from me, and we had hundreds of hours of conversation. In terms of the soul of America, a lot of those people are embracing just the opposite. And there's something very but as neighbors, as people to do business with, as people in their churches, their souls look fine. They still look like the good people that I came to love back when I was doing the radio show with them, before something happened to the soul of America in terms of their consciousness, where somehow they believe something which has been demonstrated to be false more than almost anything in American public life ever. The stolen election lie. You couldn't ask for anything to be more fully disproven than that has been.
Yeah.
But they believe it. So something got worked there. But then the other part of my experience is, and I could go back to the early 90s, but I didn't really realize what I came to realize in 2004. I've been trying to say to the other part of America that there's something rising over here that's changing the nature of our political battles. These are not people with whom one can build bridges, because they are not interested in how do we work together to serve the people and to move the country forward. Something has changed. The nature of the battle has changed. The nature of what we're up against, which is the title of my 2015 book, the nature of what we're up against is fundamentally at a more profound level. Because, and what I have found is that it did not compute, because the soul of America did not have that concept that you might be up against something which is the moral equivalent of the Death Star, or what's this? Oh, I have trouble remembering the evil, the guy. Sauron, is that the guy in the Lord of the Ring? Is it Sauron?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Yeah, and then the military-industrial rapists of Pandora in Avatar. We're up against something like that, and what I found was that the soul of America had lost contact with that level. Liberals could go into the movie theater and through the manipulations of artists, get put into that space where they're ready to do battle against evil vicariously through the characters with whom they identify. But when essentially the same thing is happening in our world, where we've got something which is turning race against race, which is refusing to act responsibly with climate change, which is trying to undermine American democracy, which is our great blessing, which is doing one thing after another, which is sort of partakes of all that stuff. They did not recognize that this registers on that same basic level, and that therefore did not respond to it as in the spirit that you do when you're trying to defend the sacred and you're fighting for your life.
Yeah.
So the soul of America has a little distance to go. Nonetheless, a lot of people have made movement. Once they started seeing more clearly in the last 6 years that something is rising here that is not our father's Republican Party,
right?
Not something that Ronald Reagan would ever have signed on for,
or Abraham Lincoln, for that matter,
or Barry Goldwater.
Yeah.
I actually had some interaction with Barry Goldwater in the early 70s. I don't like his politics, but he was a man of integrity.
Yeah.
And we've got something here which, if somebody acts with integrity like Liz Cheney, she gets kicked out.
Yeah.
So this is something that we, if we are alive to the reality, which has a spiritual dimension and has a moral dimension. And if we don't really believe, and the secular worldview has a shadow on both those ideas. Mm-hmm. That's another conversation that we could have. But in order to respond powerfully, we have to be able to connect with those moral and spiritual passions that those movies put us in touch with.
Yeah.
But which the secular world, the liberal world, has had difficulty connecting with. So I've tried to build bridges to them in a way which is completely responsible in terms of secular understanding of things, which uses reason to draw conclusions on the basis of evidence.
Yeah. I do find it very interesting, too, that there have been a few who have been on that side, if you will. And over the course of the last 4, 5, 6 years of watching and observing what's been going on, they're going, I want no part of this. And they flip parties. They say, no.
Like the Never Trump group.
Yeah. And I'm going, the people who are staying, they can't be stupid people, but at the same time, it's like to use a phrase that was sort of brought up from the early 70s massacre. It's like they're drinking the Kool-Aid.
Oh.
And there's nothing that's going to change them because they keep drinking it, or they keep breathing the same gas that is befuddling the logic centers of the brain to at least consider I'm not saying let's change their minds. I'm saying, are you even willing to consider the possibility that blah, 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 blah?
Well, there are two different groups in that side of the world, as is generally the case with forces of this nature. We know from lots of witnesses that, let's say, the Republicans in Congress know what's true. I mean, we've seen, like in the wake of January 6th, just to illustrate the point. Yeah. We've heard Kevin McCarthy speak the truth about what happened, with this attempted coup d'etat. I mean, he didn't speak all the truth, but, he was basically talking like a normal person who sees reality. But then, for reasons of opportunism, I would say it's a problem not of he hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid. We know that from the video of what he said in the week before he went down to Florida to kiss the ring. Mm-hmm. We know that he knows, and we know that all through the Trump presidency, the Republicans in Congress knew that what they were telling the world was false. They knew that they were playing a deceptive role with their followers. So I make a distinction between the people who, let's say, vote to acquit a president who's been impeached twice, if he's not impeachable, our founders would have had difficulty coming up with an image of a more impeachable president. So the people in the Senate who voted to acquit Trump presumably knew full well that what he did with Ukraine and what he did in inciting an insurrection was more than enough grounds to remove him from office. They knew that, but they said otherwise. But the people I live among, I think they believe the lies that they're told. Mm-hmm. So Newt Gingrich studied I think Goebbels is the famous Nazi propagandist. Mm-hmm. The phrase of the big lie has been used a lot in America in the last year and a half, but I believe it originates in that literature from Goebbels about if you tell a lie often enough, the people will eventually believe it. And if you're going to lie, the bigger the lie, the better, the more they will believe it. It is part of the fascistic spirit that the relationship between the people in power and the people who support that power is one of deception, manipulation, exploitation. It is not in the interests of the people that I live among that they support what they support.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they wanted to repeal Obamacare. The people it would have hurt are a lot of the people around here who are enthusiastic. There's nothing in their program that improves their lives.
Mm.
It is, and the people in Germany, and I'm not saying this is the equivalent of Nazism. I've given a lot of thought to what's parallel, which is a lot, and what's different, which is also important. But the power structure in which people in power lie to the people whose support they utilize for their power, that is fundamental to the fascist spirit.
Mm. Well, we are on the brink of, I'm hoping, a new direction, or at least a continuation of that direction of constructive evolutionary process of humanity, at least in America. But what's interesting too, Doctor, is that America is not the only country that's going through something like this. I remember the Brazilian election.
This whole democracy, according to Freedom House, has been in retreat every year since 2006. And the question, why is there this worldwide phenomenon, is one that preoccupies me a lot. It's largely a mystery to me. I focused a lot on the American example, but you're right. Brazil, India, mm-hmm. Russia, Turkey, the Philippines. There's been a lot of this stuff. And I don't know what is it that these countries are all connected, obviously.
Somehow.
But something's going on beneath my observation.
But then there's another element that's also taking place in the Middle East. You have women who are saying, no more. You're not going to keep us down anymore. And they're willing to,
you're talking about Iran.
Iran, yes. That's just one of many countries I know where people are saying enough is enough. We've had enough of this. We are individuals. We have individual rights, and you are not going to keep us down. And the only way you will keep us down is if you kill us. But you can't.
Well, I don't see that. I don't see that happening. I mean, I don't know where else you think it's happening. I mean, I know that there's discontent in Saudi Arabia and hardline countries like that. But I don't. What's happening in Iran is a real uprising of that sort, and that's the only one I'm aware of.
Well, the only other one,
the human spirit is always going to be a force.
Yeah. The only other country I would throw in there because they are actively participating in their own personal survival is Ukraine. At least right now.
I thought you were talking about the Middle East.
I'm globally, but the Middle East has a good representation of the human spirit willing to do what is necessary to achieve their, shall we say, their liberty, their individual rights and freedom in that respect, that they've had enough of totalitarianism.
One of the good, I think I was going to make this point. I don't think I quite got to it, but when evil, defined as I defined it, if you recall, gains in power, people who aren't somehow broken in ways which allow them to get swept up on the side of evil will have a response, because we are built to strive for what is life-serving. That's what's selected for out of the evolutionary process. And so one of the things that evil does is it makes those people who are not aligned with it rise to fight against it. Mm-hmm. And if you're fighting against something which is continually working to make things worse, it means you are pushing in the direction of working to make things better. if what you're against is pushing toward the end zone on the side of the field of brokenness, then if you're trying to push the line of scrimmage toward the other end zone, you're working in the direction of wholeness. And that's one of the things in terms of the soul of America that has been a beneficial result. People of my generation grew up in an America in which there were real problems, but we were making progress against them. Civil rights and women's rights and things like that. We were moving in a good direction. Yeah. We took a lot for granted. When I wrote the book that my 1970 experience inspired me to write, it was 84 by the time it got published by the University of California Press, called The Parable of the Tribes. When I wrote that book, I was a critic of America. I was a critic of the America in which I had grown up. My criticisms were valid. I mean, we've always been a far from perfect country. But in retrospect, I can see I took a lot for granted. I was brought up in a free country where people could say validly we were the richest country the world had ever known, where President Eisenhower could visit India and there would be, 500,000 people on the side because the United States had saved the world in World War II, and here's our war hero who oversaw D-Day, and now he's president of the United States. And we were, that's the world I grew up in and criticized. I criticized because of our Jim Crow South, and I criticized because of McCarthyism, and I criticized because of American imperialism, and I criticized because we had capitalism with the power without sufficient regulation to prevent it from doing some fairly destructive things. But now I see, wow, look at all we had.
Yeah.
Now that it's under threat. So I too have felt pushed in the direction of appreciating what our founders gave us.
Yeah.
Imperfect that it may be.
Yeah. Now,
it is so much better than overthrowing the will of the people because somebody wants to hold on to power to satisfy his own ego needs.
Yeah. Yeah. They use the phrase, the great American experiment. In science, you conduct experiments to maybe prove a theory or disprove a theory, to, in some cases, maybe just to see what happens. I conducted an experiment. It was not in the classroom. It was in the laundry room, where I thought I would mix bleach and ammonia and some of the other stuff that my mother had in there just to see what would happen, and made myself thoroughly sick to where I threw up. I was so bad because for some stupid reason I decided, wonder what that smells like. And then, of course, it was not good. It was not good. But eventually the experiments come to an end, and we either prove or disprove our theory. We've seen what happens. Maybe we'll do it a couple of times to see if we can reproduce the same conditions and so forth. With the great American experiment, is there such a thing as something to achieve, a goal to be met, or is the great American experiment literally just an ongoing experiment to see if we can keep it together?
Well, I think of what Franklin said. I think upon leaving the Constitutional Convention, he was asked, "What kind of government have you guys created?" That's not verbatim, but
sure.
But this is, I think, is verbatim. A republic, madam, if we can keep it, or if you can keep it. So it is this ongoing thing. And 7 years later, or approximately, Lincoln at Gettysburg said, I can't remember how many times have I heard the Gettysburg address.
I know the feeling.
we are engaged in a great civil war to see if if the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. This isn't quite the way the order, but he says to see if this or any other government so constituted shall long endure.
Right.
So what we are seeing here is, I think, a more serious possible threat to the success of that experiment than even the Civil War was. Because if the South had, there are problems with what the South did, but if they had succeeded or been allowed to go, there still would have been a substantial country ruled by the Constitution that was still a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. So it would not have ceased to endure. Lincoln seemed to think, and I'm not sure why he thought this. I've discussed it with some Civil War. Anyway, he seemed to think that if it split apart, the experiment would have failed. I don't understand why he thinks that. I see there would have been problems, but I see the Union. But right now, with that experiment, what is really at stake is not that we would have part of the country go its separate path in service of the empire of the slave power, but we would have had the entire thing taken over by the kind of thing that we've seen emerging with the power that's been wielded by the 45th president of the United States and his allies.
Yeah.
And that would be a failure of the experiment. But I also want to, just if I may, tie this in with the larger experiment that I thought that we would focus more on. I have no regrets about it. We can talk another time about anything that we didn't cover fully.
Sure.
But the larger experiment is, can life evolve and give forth a creature like us that steps onto the path of civilization, which I say inevitably is really dangerous, problematic, challenging, and would be, regardless of the creature's own inherent nature, it's in the situation. It's a systemic problem. The experiment is, if you bring forth such a creature, and that creature then it launches itself into a social evolutionary process that is largely beyond its control. Can it bring it under control in time not to destroy itself? I say that's a toss-up with humankind.
Right.
I wonder what's happened elsewhere in the cosmos where there are other creatures that have stepped onto this, because I think that is the central challenge that would face any creature that stepped onto that path. Will you be able to order your civilization well enough, soon enough, to avoid destroying yourselves, so that creature can thrive, and that life on that planet out of which it emerged, of which it remains a part, can also thrive? That's the fundamental question that faces humankind. And the jury is way out. Yeah. I mean, way out.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons why we kind of focused more on America and its society and civilization is because it is said that the way America goes, the rest of the world, not all, but much of the rest of the world tends to follow, or everybody's watching around the world to see what we're going to do next, so that's to me an interesting place for us to be in, that everybody is watching to see how we're going to behave, how we're going to not only treat each other in our own country, but how we're going to treat other people in other countries, how open we are to understanding the different cultures and social norms of whether it be the Arab countries or the Asian countries or Africa or Europe. It doesn't matter, because every single part of the world has different ways of living, different social norms, if you will. I mean, we don't eat, as a rule, we don't eat dogs and horses in this country. There are other countries that's their food source. That's just
what we have been, though, and you're right, and I think it's good to call attention to that. America has played a role in the world. Well, I mean, it looked like maybe Wilson might have done that, but what happened with the Treaty of Versailles sort of, but you know, people felt terribly let down because he had held out a whole lot of hope. So, but after World War II, thanks in large measure to Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and George Marshall, the United States played a really important role in moving in protecting the better values of civilization. And then a couple generations later, Madeleine Albright, then Secretary of State, describes this country as the world's indispensable nation. And we have been the leader of the free world, both because we're the biggest economy, the mightiest military, and because we have a heritage of a kind that led, well, it's not for no reason that France made a statue for us to put in New York Harbor. We've been a beacon to the world for all of our faults. So you're right. Yeah, and one of the things that I said that I'm kind of bewildered by why democracy has been in retreat on a worldwide basis. I think part of it is that over the last 20 years, our example has been besmirched by us. The feelings of the rest of the world about the invasion of Iraq, we should not forget. We tore a rip in the fabric that America had led the world in weaving, having to do with the international order.
Right.
And then we ended up with a politics in which the ability of our two parties to function together to get important things done kind of disappeared for reasons that you could imagine what I'd say.
Sure.
If that's not what everybody's trying to do, then, politics gets into being a zero-sum game rather than of conflict, of unrelenting conflict instead of cooperation to get good things done. We don't look very good to the world. Yeah. We can't pass gun legislation that prevents us from having 10 times as many massacres as every other country in our peer group. I mean, all kinds of things that we did not look good.
Yeah, yeah.
And if democracy is not looking good, the American example that you were talking about, and then on the other side, until Putin made this huge blunder of invading Ukraine, he was a guy playing a poor hand well. And the Chinese were making demonstrable progress in a very authoritarian system. And the example of the other authoritarian road was looking better and better, while democracy, in its leading exemplar for, since 1789 or whatever, was looking worse and worse. That may go some distance in explaining why democracy has been threatened, losing ground in a whole diversity of countries from India to Turkey, et cetera, et cetera.
It's almost as if, well, shoot, if they can't keep it together and make it work, then we don't stand a chance. So we'll just try something else. It's almost kind of the way that it is.
Whatever will get will get us what we want, whether it be you admire Putin because he took this diminished Russia, post-Cold War Russia, and started really actually building it back to being more of a world power. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, if that's what you want, if you want to be a big guy on the world stage, you do it better that way. While the American experiment is looking like we're losing the ability to be leader of the free world.
Yeah.
And or if what you want is your GDP to increase like a miracle, like the way China has become, an economy. Who would have thought in 1970 when Mao died that by this time, the people are talking about the Chinese economy overtaking the American not in terms of per capita, but in terms of GDP. Oh, if that's what you want, development, you do better if you've got a system where you got a party in power and you got authoritarians that run the show and generate productivity.
It's also another element to toss into the mix here. This country has been around from its founding in 1776 until 2022. And although I'm starting to take a look at some of the other countries around the world and how long their governments have been around, I mean, for example, China, they haven't been a communist country for 5,000 years, but no form of government lasts forever. Everything is temporal. And I'm not advocating that we do away with this. Don't get me wrong, but that maybe we can not necessarily turn it around, but move to the next level of evolution for our society, our civilization, that will then, I hope, have some level of influence on, as we have, the rest of the world. Maybe we can get our integrity back, so that the rest of the world can at least say, well, okay, we'll give them a second chance. All right, looks like they're doing pretty good. They're starting to come out of the melees. They're starting to come out of the dark, out of the back of the cave. All right, we'll give them another chance, kind of thing.
Well, I think we have to come from hope on that.
Yeah.
And I'm more hopeful today than I was yesterday.
Yes.
But why it would have been better if I gather the last thing I saw is that the House of Representatives is now going to be under the control of the Republicans, and that means that nothing's going to be accomplished. For the next 2 years. So it would have been better if we could have accomplished. I mean, a lot of good things got done in the last 2 years.
Sure.
At the simple level of infrastructure, but a lot more stuff, and there's a lot more that could and should have been done. But at least there will be checks on that. And but you say everything is temporary. I don't know. I've long been a critic of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. As if a lot of people have put out theories of history in which the fall is sort of inevitable. Like I've got oak trees and a big sugar maple out my window here, and 100 years from now they're not going to be here because they are built with and nor will I, for that matter.
Or I.
Because we're organically programmed to rise and fall. We're born, we live, we die, But I don't think something like what we're striving for with this American experiment is inherently like that. Okay. I think it's more that we're on a roller coaster ride dealing with history, with all of its unpredictability. I mean, for example, I could tell you about how central I think it is that the white supremacy power that was in the Democratic Party for more than a century and the corporate greed power that was in the Republican Party for, still is, that they used to cancel each other out. Because when the political battle got waged, one of them's pushing in one direction, one of them's pushing in the other direction, and so they canceled each other out. But because of the LBJ signing the civil rights legislation, and he said, we're going to lose the South for a generation. Well, it's been two and still there. Because of that, they are both in one party. So history just throws up a bunch of random stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And non-random stuff, or just stuff that we can't quite see where it's coming from. And so an experiment, it's not that it was temporary. It's that sometimes we cope well with what history sends our way, and sometimes we blow it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that the way we have blown it this time is a systemic problem of the soul that we've been talking about a couple times already in this conversation, which is that there's a problem on both sides.
Yeah.
One side aligning itself with something destructive, and the other side failing to recognize and properly combat that. I don't think that if, say, FDR or a whole political party in the spirit of FDR, whom I studied a bunch when I was running for Congress because I loved to read about great leadership when I was aspiring to be a decent leader. If FDR had been the spirit of the Democratic Party since the rise of, say, Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh, and then Fox News and Karl Rove, and eventually Trump, if that spirit had been in the Democratic Party, it never could have gone as far as it's gone. I think he would have called it out, summoned the American people to the better angels of their nature, and defeated the thing in the cradle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas something happened in the meanwhile in the liberal world, in the secular world that's risen since FDR's day, I think that impeded the proper response. And so this thing that could have been defeated in the cradle got to be a good, healthy child, and now is shown itself in its full manhood, threatening everything that we hold sacred. So it's a systemic problem with different sides manifesting different forms of brokenness.
Dr. Andrew Schmookler is my guest here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we want you to go to the website, abetterhumanstory.org, find out more, read some of the op-ed and articles, and even get a copy of some of his books that I think will help you to better understand where we stand as a people, not just America, but globally, and where we go from here. And that's going to be up to each one of us as to where we go from here. And I think that Dr. Schmookler, you've made your point very clear that you want to have a part in that process, as do we. I've said this before, if asked, well, what are you trying to accomplish with this program, Richard? I want to change the world for the better for everybody, not just for a select few. Now, whether that happens in my lifetime or ever happens at all, I honestly believe that the rhetoric and the vitriol and the caustic nature of our society today does not help. I heard a talk show host just a few days ago talking about the aggressiveness of the dialogue within the campaigns and all of that I just mentioned. And I actually yelled at the radio. I said, but you don't understand the irony of what you just said because you are part of the problem. Name calling and this person ought to be locked up and that person ought to be prosecuted. And it's like, this is not helping, and if this person ever had a solution, I can't hear it for all the whining, So you're not whining. You are expressing historical facts as to what has happened with our societies and civilization over the centuries and millennia even. I really had great hope for the 21st century. I didn't think it was going to be quite this rocky. I mean, I grew up watching the Jetsons. Come on. I was really hoping for flying cars. Now, those are coming. They're getting closer. But life was so much simpler in the in the Jetsons' 21st century.
If may I come in now? and I wanted to say something. I never know, how I'm coming across to people, but my hope is that there are people out there who think that maybe I have put something together. My life's work has been trying to see things whole. And this conversation has moved through enough different domains that I've made some suggestive brushstrokes about some of the connections. And if anybody's wondering, well, is it possible that perhaps this guy, meaning me, has put things together that could help us get our act together by improving how we understand ourselves and how we got here and the nature of the challenges that we face and how we need to meet them. If it's been plausible enough that that somebody wants to see, does he really deliver the goods? If they go to my website, which has got a whole lot of material on it, I'm trying to archive the whole thing that I've generated in the last 52 years. But if you go through the portal that says my articles in Quarks Daily, where I've been running a series there, I won a competition to contribute there. I've been using that opportunity to lay out a series of which there are now 5 pieces, which, if you're interested to see whether the secular worldview that you've got can be amended in some significant ways having to do with the reality of evil, the importance or the centrality of a battle between good and evil, the reality importance of the moral dimension, the reality importance of the spiritual dimension, and arguing it in a way that I got trained by my father and the greater universities of Harvard, Yale, Chicago, Berkeley, how to think and work out a theory. If you want to check it out, go there and see if I deliver the goods. I'm 76. I'm doing everything I can to contribute into the consciousness of our society, which I'm worrying about, something I think could be of some help. And it's kind of embarrassing to do that because I'm making claims that, it'd be better if the world said, oh, you've done this or that, but I'm having to make the claims. I mean, I'm not the only one, but I'm a marginal figure making big claims. So that's embarrassing. But I think I can show anybody who's interested in knowing whether that integrative vision of the human story actually holds water and illuminates some things that are important. That's how I suggest they check it out.
Well, that's part of what this program is all about, is bringing people such as yourself to the podium, if you will, to share their ideas, their thoughts and observations, and even beliefs and opinions, for that matter, that we want people to consider. I'm not saying, God forbid, don't agree.
Oh, please do.
Please.
I'm trying to persuade,
Well,
but I appreciate you're a host, and you've got a role of great value to provide people a menu of options to use to make the world better as they see fit.
Yeah. And that's how I think we can still, even if there are, and by the way, I have checked the population clock, if you will, or population meter over the last week, this past week, and we are at 7.99 billion. I think we're going to hit.
You're talking about the number of your listeners?
I don't know. Some of them, that'd be nice. That'd be nice if they were all listening. I think we're going to hit 8 billion before the end of this year, yet they're predicting that it'll be sometime in early 2023. But the way it's going, it's just, we just keep making more of us, and I think we'll hit 8. What that'll actually mean, I don't know, other than we'll have 8 billion people. Here we are, the 21st century, it's 2022, and we are very excited to have folks such as yourself who are contributing to creating, and I'm hoping this has a negative connotation, creating the new, shall we say, optimistic zeitgeist, if that's the right word to use in this context.
Yeah, we're back to optimism. I said hope.
Yeah, hope, optimism.
If there's a distinction, I think of optimism as I would rationally put money down on the hopeful side, even with even odds. Hopefulness is, well, I recognize that it looks like it's not as good as even odds, but that's still what I'm going to keep my eye focused on, seeing if we can get there. And I don't know what the odds are.
Yeah.
But my son owes me $100 after last night's. Well, months ago we made a bet, and either I was going to lose doubly or I was going to win doubly. And fortunately, he owes me $100.
Well, you need to collect and go out and have a nice dinner there. Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Schmookler, for joining us here on the program again. I would love to have you on as a regular. Matter of fact, I'd love to have you on shortly after the first of the year to talk about how things have progressed, not necessarily over the last couple of months, but certainly from your observations, both your involvement and everything. So let's see if we can't reconnect after the first of the year.
I'm all for it.
All right. Dr. Andrew Schmookler has been my guest here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and this is a special opportunity for me to thank my guest for joining us here on the program. And I'm going to ask you, even though I asked you the last time, those 3 questions. We're in our 15th year, and I'll be honest with you, I don't recall whether I asked you the new set of questions or the old, but we're into the new set. And so we're going to start with that first question of who is Andrew Schmookler?
Well, if I can't answer that, who could? I'm a guy who got called onto a path. Not sure how that happened. I guess it must be my family culture. Some played a role, and I'm doing my best to fulfill that calling with integrity. And I'm also a fortunate person in that I've had a lot of good things that I've taken for granted that I've learned not to take for granted anymore.
Number 2, what is your life's purpose?
Well, my life's purpose, I mean, I'm engaged in the pursuit of happiness, like every good American,
I like that.
So I definitely want to, I want fulfillment for myself. I want to, my wife is an election worker, and she hurt her knee carrying a really heavy box of ballots on Monday. My purpose in that case is to make her life easier and to get her back on her feet so I don't have to keep washing the dishes. But at a higher level, my purpose is to serve those things that I hold sacred. And, human thriving and fulfillment and the health of our living planet incorporate pretty much of all that, what all that's about. So, and they are endangered. So my purpose is to contribute to their protection.
Well, my final question is a new one for the 15th year of this program, and it is, what was your best day?
Oh, you did ask me that before. Yeah, this is for sure the same set of questions. I like the way I answered that one. I said I was going to define best day as the day that if you took it away, the consequences over the long term would have most damaged my fulfillment in life. And I went ahead to describe the circumstances in which I met my current beloved, my wife. And I felt good about that because, I don't know if that was the happiest day, but it was pretty good because it was at a book party for me that resulted, which represented the fulfillment of a long and difficult trail to get to that point. So it was a pretty good day in the immediate time. But the main thing is it got her and me on a path that's it was always a good relationship, and then after 20 years, it enriched itself deeper. I didn't know that a marriage could get deeper after 20 years. I thought the fires go out, but on my website, I've got something called the sacred space of lovers, and which is something I've enjoyed writing when I was tired of dealing with all the darkness. To deal with something which is worth celebrating. Anyway, that day is responsible for my having that kind of stuff to say.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be talking with you again in 2023.
Okay. May the force be with you.
And you too, sir. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal and Jeanette, I am listening.